Hey everybody, welcome to Cousin Jack Carves. So today we'll begin our study of eyes by looking at realistic type of eyes, and we'll show you some examples. So we're going to be carving eyes, and more eyes. We'll have examples from Jeff Phares, an example from Harold Enlow, where he uses 4 V-tool cuts to form the basic shape of the eye. The diamond eye from Mike Pounders through Rich Weatherbee. And then Kevin Coates has a way of carving eyes. It's kind of unusual. I call it the inside out eye. I don't know what he calls it. So, Kevin, what is it? We'll go through each one of these different examples. 2 of them are knife only. Others will use gouges and V-tools, as I mentioned earlier. It's going to be a lot of fun, and we'll find out different ways to get to the same point, carving eyes. So let's get rolling. So let's start with a pretty simple example, and this is sort of a flat plain eye, and this is from Harley Refsal. He has a book that he published with Fox Chapel Publishing. It's called Whittling Little Folk, and very often he'll just carve the eye plane and paint in the eyes. Of course, with flat plane carving, it's simplified, so it's a really simple approach. Now, where he says, you carve in the eyes, he uses an example of using 2 triangles. So we'll just kind of draw that on here. And then with the 2 triangles, he simply will carve out one portion of it, say on this side. So if the character is looking this way, there's this negative space that creates the dark area of the eye. He'll usually take out a really small chip on the back side over here and then paint this part white. So that's what we'll do today with this example, what I would call the flat plane eye. Go ahead and get my glove on here. Anytime you're carving eyes, of course, you have to have really sharp tools. This is a 1-inch detailer knife from Helvey. Detail knife works well when you're carving eyes, and eyes I know can be somewhat intimidating for a lot of folks. So after we've drawn the triangles on here, we're just going to score that border very lightly. Not cutting deep at all. Just going around that edge. Like so. Now, since we're making our character look this way, we'll cut out that triangle. And of course, this is where we want to go deeper. So we're going to take that knife, put the tip of that knife into that corner, plunge the tip in there, and then come back to this line that we drew right here. Same thing on the top. Plunge the tip right in there and draw the knife back to the line. Now we want to separate that part of the triangle. So again, got to get in there with the tip and bring the blade down. Now we should have a triangle cut. Now, if that doesn't just pop out, just kind of reform your lines just a little bit until it's ready to wiggle loose. I can see that it's loosening up already. Now, one of the things you might have to do as well is sort of get in here and clean up afterward, because we want to get some depth into that corner. And like I said, you might have to go back and clean up some cuts. Okay. So once we have that part of the triangle cut, just going to smooth this out a little bit. And come back on the other side, take out a tiny little chip from this corner, just putting the very point of the blade into that corner to remove a small triangle here. So after that, you would just, like I say, do some cleanup. And that's the very basic, sort of a flat plane look that Harley Refsal uses and that he teaches in the book. So just to give you the name of the book again, it's called Whittling Little Folk from Fox Chapel Publishing. I'll put a link to the book in the description below the video. So this is a very simple eye. Next we'll move on and we'll do a realistic rounded looking eye, and that's from a book by Jeff Phares. Okay, so this next eye will be a more realistic eye as described by Jeff Phares. He has a book called Carving the Human Face, and that's another Fox Chapel Publishing book. And in there he talks about some things that we want to remember when we're trying to make realistic eyes. One of those things is that, let's say here's our bridge of our nose right here. That center line for the middle of our eye should be just below that bridge of the nose. So let's say probably like this. He also suggests that you draw that center line and extend it beyond where that eyeball would be. The reason being, we need that for reference. Very often what happens is we carve off the center line, and then if we go to redraw it, we might redraw it too low or too high. Having the extended line on each end gives us that reference point so we can put the line back in pretty effectively. Another tip, don't start too close to the nose with that eyeball, right? If you look at a human face, you'll see there's some space in between the nose and the corner of that eye. And of course, there's a tear duct, right, that we rarely would ever try and carve a tear duct into the eye. So leave some space between that nose and the inside corner of the eye. Another thing we want to do, when we think about that top eyelid, we got to remember that it's going to peak right about here, before we even get to center. Then we'll have a flattened area, and then bring it down below that center line. It crosses down below it. With the bottom lid, it's sort of the opposite. It's going to bottom out right about there. And we want to keep it pretty close to that center line when we're talking about that bottom lid. One of the very common mistakes that happens with all of us is that we make eyes that are too far open, like wide open, like a staring look. And in real life, people's eyes really aren't like that. It's rare that we walk around with our eyes just wide open. So that's another kind of a common mistake that we want to sort of avoid. Okay, let's get the gloves on and we'll start with this eye. So the first thing, before I do that, I want to mark where the center of that eyeball will be and put in some reference marks for those outside edges. The first thing we'll do is start rounding by carving around these edges here. And we'll use a gouge for that. So I have a 5mm number 6 sweep gouge. And I'm going to come from the top and curve down towards the middle. Just like that. Then I'll come from underneath up to the middle, like so. The idea here is to get some space around the outside of this eyeball so we can create that sphere, right? If we want a realistic looking eye, we have to get that rounded look. Again, coming from the top down to the middle, and then from the bottom back up to that middle. And it doesn't take long before we have that depth that we're looking for. On the inside corner of the eye, right next to the nose, that's where we probably have one of the deepest parts of our face. So we want to make sure we have that depth there. Now I also want to open that end up, the outside edge, because these eyes, you know, when you think about these eye sockets, they sort of wrap around from the side of your head. Okay. Just removing some material from above and below that eyeball. And then we'll do some more rounding. All right, so now we want to start from the middle and round outward. For that, I'm going to use a smaller gouge, and this is a 3mm number 11. Just going to start making this rounded shape by pushing out from the center towards the outside edges. And we'll come around this side, do that same thing. Push towards the outside. I want to flatten out some of those ridged areas there, so I'm going to use a broader gouge to remove some of those lines. Now I haven't removed any wood from the very center of that eyeball, because we want to keep that material there so So we've got that sphere. We want to have that in place. And we'll do a little bit more shaping here. Okay, so we're starting to have this cylindrical shape now, which is where we want to be. That center line coming down the center of that eyeball, sort of in the middle of our cylinder. I want to get back in here and get some more depth again. Right up here next to that nose is where that depth has to be. So now let's redraw that center line going across the eye. Okay, so now we're going to draw in the upper and lower eyelids, all right? So we want that upper eyelid to peak about right here. And we're going to flatten out a little bit. Then drop it down below the center line. Just like that. And then we'll go ahead and put in a stop cut. I'm going straight in with the blade, not going to be angled at all. Coming down to the corner. Across the top. Down below that center line, and then extend it out. So our next step is to slice up to that stop cut that we just made. We want to maintain that roundness that we built already with the gouge. And we'll turn it upside down a little bit. Again, coming up to the stop cut. And as we talked about, maintaining that rounded look, that's what we're going for. And the way to do that really is to just check your depth around that upper lid. You want to have the depth to be equal all the way across the top, where the lid meets the eyeball. And in doing that, you'll be able to maintain the roundness that you already built into that eyeball with the gouges. You can see I'm starting way down at the bottom and slicing up here. I'm going to come over here to this extended part of that upper lid and just reinforce my stop cut there. Next step, we'll draw in the lower lid. And to do that, again, we're going to redraw that center line that we had in here before, which was coming across right about here. Because remember, we extended that line so we could see that. Now we want to have that thing bottom out right about here and keep that lower lid relatively close to that center line. We don't want that Popeye look, right? We don't want the eyeballs too far open. Again, we're going to work with a stop cut on that bottom lid, and then we'll slice down to it. So we'll just come right here with the tip of the knife, bring it down to the part where that lid bottoms out, and then make a cut along the remainder of that bottom lid up to the corner. Now we'll slice from the top down to that bottom lid. In here we have options. There are a number of different tools you could use to do this job. You could use a knife, detail knife. You could use a skew, would work just fine. And if you have like a Helvey broadaxe knife, you could use that. Again, we're trying to maintain the roundness of that eyeball. Again, just slicing downward now. And again, you want to make sure you check your depth all along that bottom eyelid. That's how you know you're maintaining that same rounded shape. Okay. So now we've got our eyeball more or less roughed out there. And the next thing we do is just sort of clean that up with our gouge. So underneath the eye, we could come in here with a gouge, just create some space for the bag underneath the eye. And while we're at it, let's tuck that lower eyelid underneath this upper eyelid. Remember earlier we sort of extended this line from the upper eyelid, so we'll just slice right underneath that stop cut there. And then we'll take out a little bit of a chip. That will help to indicate where that lower eyelid tucks up underneath the upper. Again, we'll clean this up with the gouge, sort of flatten out this area right below the eye. Then we can use a smaller gouge to sort of add some wrinkles to where that bag of the eye would be. We can come down underneath there, give it a little character. come along the upper part of the eyelid to separate that from the eyebrow. And then I can come in here with a very small V tool. Just start putting in a few little wrinkles underneath the eye. And then again too, you can start developing that eyebrow. Of course, you can just cut in some eyelash or eyebrow hairs. And one of the things you want to do probably as you get near the end, you want to reinforce some of these cuts to go back in there with your knife to create some shadow where you have your stop cuts for the eyelids on the upper and lower part. And that's how you can create a very rounded looking, realistic type of eye. Well, a little bonus feature for you. Sonny reminded me, okay, well, how about the iris? How about the pupil? You know, and I stopped right here because this is where you would stop if you were going to paint in the iris and the pupil, which a lot of us do. However, if you had a carving and you planned not to put a finish on it, you want to go with a natural wood, maybe you're using butternut or some other wood that has some really nice grain to feature, let's go ahead and carve in an iris and a pupil. So I've got this number 6. It's a 5mm number 6. I'm going to put in some lines here to create the iris. And I got to grab my detail knife. Here we go. So we can see where those lines are. All right, so you can create your iris pretty quickly with the gouge. Next thing I would do is take a small little veiner. A veiner is a number 11 gouge that happens to be really small, like this one. This is a flex cut. I think it's maybe 2mm. And what I want to do is sort of come up here right below that eyelid with a stab cut. And put in that pupil. I want to go a little bit bigger, so I'm going to go with a 3mm. This is a Dockyard 3mm with a Helvey handle on it. You may have to get back in there with your detail knife to relieve that thing. If it doesn't pop out, don't dig at it with your gouge. Just use your detail knife. And that's how you would put in your iris and a pupil if you were, like I say, not going to paint your carving. Sunny also let me know that these lines are very distracting. I wanted to use a pen so that the lines would show up a little bit better in the video, but I can understand how that would be distracting and actually prevent you from seeing some of these details. All right, let's move on then. So next we'll look at an example from Harold Enlow, where he uses a V-tool with 4 slices of a V-tool to create the basic shape of the eye. As always, we want to start with very sharp tools, and that includes your V-tool. If you're going to be working on this example that Harold Enlow has in his book. So now we'll have an example from Harold Enlow. He has a book called Carving Faces Workbook, and that's another Fox Chapel publishing book. I'll put a link to the book in the description below the video. So in his book, he has lots and lots of eyes that he carves, and he shows you how to carve. So there's the basic open eye, which we will do here. He has a sleepy eye, a drunk person's eye, and he also does an angry eye. So I do encourage you to take a look at that Carving Faces Workbook from Harold Enlow. Let's start out. So he starts by taking a chip out of each corner, which is pretty common, right? You see this a lot with a lot of folks who carve eyes, just removing a chip from each corner to help set that depth, create roundness. So that's not unusual. I think what is a little more unusual with Harold's approach is the use of the V-tool. But you know what? Figure if it's good enough for Harold Enlow, it's probably good enough for all of us. All right. So we've got the chip out of each corner, and we'll grab our handy V-tool. This is a Swiss-made V-tool, relatively large in size. I have different sizes of V-tools. This is probably the largest one that I have, and it's pretty sharp. So the first V-tool cut is to sort of create this upper eyelid fold. And that's going to be above the eyeball where that eyelid sort of folds. And to do that, we're going to lay that tool over so that the point of that V is facing upward, just like that. Okay? And we're going to be using the wing of that V-tool to help us create that fold in that upper eyelid. There we go. So again, that's the fold. The eyelid itself is going to be down here. This is where that fold occurs in that upper eyelid. So our second V-tool cut will be a similar thing with the lower eyelid. And the fold, I should say. All right, so the third V-tool cut is to put in that upper eyelid. So we'll come to that apex of where that lid would peak, bring that cut down into the corner. Now you'll notice here I've got the V-tool perpendicular to the eyeball now. It's not laid over like it did with the fold. And then the fourth cut, putting in that lower eyelid. And that can give us our basic shape for the eyeball. From there, it's a matter of sort of taking those cuts, and you want to put in your stop cut along the top. And along that bottom eyelid. Then we're going to slice up to the stop cut on the top. Again, we're sort of creating some roundness here. So start down near the bottom and slice up. And we'll get into that corner. Then we slice down to the stop cut that we put in for the bottom eyelid. And before you know it, you've got yourself an eye. So what would I do to refine this? I'd probably thin out this bottom eyelid some, flatten that down. One of the things you'll notice with eyes is the upper eyelid is thicker than the lower eyelid. It sticks out further as well. And let's think about that for a minute, right? The upper eyelid moves. It covers up that eyeball every time we wink or blink. That lower lid doesn't do much of anything except sit right there. So yeah, that lower lid should be thinner than your upper eyelid. Now what else could you do with this? Of course, you would carry that upper eyelid down, tuck the lower lid underneath it, right up here, and then cut in a bag, create the eyebrow, which, you know, the eyebrow can really change the expression and the look of that eye. And so you want to be aware of that when you're putting in your eyebrows and how you put them in. So again, we'll start with these eyebrow hairs. Start on the outside rather than the inside. Go from the top towards the eye rather than from the eye up. And again, just like before, if you're going to put in an iris and a pupil, of course you would do that with your tools. Or you would stop right there and paint in the iris and the pupil, and so on. All right, so up next, we'll look at an example from Mike Pounders. He said he learned it from Rich Weatherbee. It's called the diamond eye. And that's going to be using our knife. Okay, so now we're going to try the diamond eye. And I first saw this, Mike Pounders shared a video a number of years ago on his YouTube channel. I'll put a link to that video in the description below this video. And in providing that example, I believe Mike said that he learned it from Rich Weatherbee. So I want to give credit where credit is due. Mike says he learned it from Rich. Rich Weatherbee may have learned it from someone else. I don't know. It's called the diamond eye, and you can see I've drawn this diamond shape right here. And yes, Sonny asked me to draw in the pupil and the iris on the previous example. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is put in some stop cuts around the borders of our diamond. And with those stop cuts, I'm going to come over here into the corner. This is the backside corner. This will be the front over here. Let's say the nose is over here. All right, so I'm going to put the tip of that knife in there, and then I'm going to angle that blade upward and come along that upper border of the diamond. Just like that. Continue the cut down to the other corner. I'm going to flip it upside down. I'm going to do the same thing. Make a stop cut all around the perimeter of the diamond. Okay, so flip it back right side up. Again, just to make sure we have this oriented, our nose is going to be over here. Okay? So the first cut for the diamond eye will be to remove just a sliver of wood from around those stop cuts that we put in just a second ago. So we're going to just come up right underneath the stop cut, carry that around the borders. That one don't want to pop out, does it? You know, sometimes we just have to go back and make our cut a second time. Okay, so now after we've got that sliver removed from each side, we're going to come to this front part of the diamond. And about halfway down, we're going to bring a line from that spot all the way to the back corner. And what this will be, this is actually going to become the upper eyelid. So now we'll just put in a stop cut where we drew that line. Going to go straight in with the blade, starting from the front, and then drawing that to the back corner, like that. Next, we slice up to it, just like we've done so many times already in these demos. We put in that upper eyelid and then take away material below there. Just kind of round it. Make sure you get the material from around the corners. And you'll probably have to turn it upside down a little bit, as we do. Okay. So kind of got that upper eyelid fashioned there. And next we'll put in the lower lid. And for that, we come along this side of the diamond, this lower front, again about halfway down. We're going to bring that to the back corner, just like we did with the upper lid. Just like that. And I bet you guessed what we're going to do next. Yep, we're going to make a stop cut. And then we'll slice down to it. There, we got our stop cut. Turn that piece of wood upside down. And we'll slice down to that stop cut. And again, we're going to be creating some roundness here. One of the things I really like about this diamond eye, it has these points of reference to make it sort of easy and sort of fun to carve. Okay, so we have the upper and the lower lids established now. So next thing we're going to do is remove a few chips. And we'll do that as you've seen before. We'll remove a chip from the back corner. We'll remove a chip not only from this front corner, but all along this front wall, between the lower and the upper eyelids. Then we're going to come up here to the top of the diamond, and we'll just take a chip out near the top as well. Let's start back here on the outside corner of the eye. Make a plunge cut there with the tip of the knife. And another one. And just get that chip out of there. Creating some depth. And as I mentioned, on this front wall, we're going to take that plunge cut and bring it down to the bottom lid, where the bottom lid meets that front wall. Same thing, plunge cut, and then bring that up to where the top lid meets that wall. And then we're just going to take out a chip. And create some depth there. Just like that. So okay, why don't we get that top of the diamond where I said we were going to take out a chip. Just right up here, just a small chip. A little plunge cut. Again, creating a little triangle here. And we'll take out a chip. So now we want to contour some of these areas, sort of soften some things up. So the first thing we'll do is sort of create that upper eyelid area by getting underneath this part of that border, just softening that up. Same on this side. We want to just bring our knife along there, soften that up a little bit. And then we want to create this upper eyelid and give it some contour. So I'm just going to roll my knife and I want to contour the lower borders as well. Just get there with the blade a little bit, soften that up. Okay. All right, so I'm going to thin out that lower lid just a little bit. As we talked about before, that lower lid should be thinner than the upper lid. And then if I were going to carry this on a little bit, I would bring that top lid down, of course, across that center line, that imaginary line that we would have there. Sort of relieve that stop cut a little bit there. And then make a cut to just show where that lower lid is going to tuck up underneath the upper lid. And we could go ahead and create a bag underneath the eye. You'll probably see and notice this is just using our knife. Right? So far we've used a variety of tools, gouges, V-tool, and I think I mentioned to you that you could use a skew for some of these things if you wanted to. And that does work fine. A skew can get into some really tight places that your knife blade, might be more difficult. If you don't have a skew, you can pick them up. They're not really expensive. I have a micro skew from Dockyard that I like a lot. It's really good for sort of chasing down some fuzzies that get down into the cracks of your wood there. All right, so we've got a little bag going underneath the eye. And then if we wanted to, we could create an eyebrow right above that eye, simply by removing some material. And as I mentioned earlier, the eyebrow can really influence the overall look, the emotion, the expression, all of that. And again, if I wanted to, I could come in here, and yes, this is using a V-tool now. You could do this with a knife if you wanted to. You could put in some eyebrow hairs and additional details in the interest of speeding this up, I decided to use the V tool real quickly. And then, again, if I wanted to paint this eyeball in, just to give you an example, there you go, the diamond eye. And then one final example that we'll cover today, and it's from Kevin Coates. Kevin has a YouTube channel. I'll put a link to Kevin's channel in the description below. And Kevin has an example on his website. He's got a video of how he carves an eye. Kevin doesn't speak during his videos, so I don't know what he calls it. I'm going to call it the inside out eye, for lack of a better term. So let me get that set up and we'll cover that one next. So we're going to do this, what I like to call the inside out eye. Kevin Coates has the example on his website, and like I said, I'll put a link to his video in the description below this video. And Kevin, you may think of this as something else. I don't know. So this is just what I'm going to call it. So we've got some lines drawn here: center line, upper eyelid fold, lower eyelid, and then the fold below that lower eyelid. And we're going to start with a stop cut, as we would typically do along that upper eyelid. So we'll come over here into that corner, sort of straight in with this cut as far as the blade angle. Just want to have a nice, clean, deep cut. Carry that down below the center line and then out. With this particular eye, the nose would be over here. All right? So this is a right eye. So let's stop cut the lower eyelid. Same thing, pretty much straight in as far as the blade angle is concerned. And like that. Okay, so next we'll start removing some chips, and this is this is what's unusual about the way that Kevin does this. It's an interesting approach. I really like it. He starts removing some of these chips from the inside towards the outside of that eye. And yeah, fairly big chips at that. Now, ultimately, this results in creating some depth and roundness below these chips. So there you go. Very quickly, we've got the makings of an eyeball, the beginning anyway. So I'm just going to clean this up a little bit. Start sort of shaping. Just carving up right now while keeping some roundness in mind. Turn that upside down. Carve down towards that bottom eyelid with the same thing in mind, right? Creating some roundness and some shape. And while you're at it, you know, you might have a little bit of fuzzies you want to clean up, what have you. That kind of thing. Not unusual. Okay, so now that we've got the beginnings of that eyeball formed, the next thing we'll do is create this upper fold line that you see above the eyeball. And now to achieve that, we're going to really get an angle underneath and create that stop cut. So we're going to angle our blade so it's facing upward, right? The back of my blade, you'll see the spine of that blade facing towards me. So we'll just get in here with the tip of the knife. Again, angle that blade and draw along a line to create that upper fold. And of course, after you get past the arc, your blade's not going to be facing upward anymore. All right, so then we're going to turn this upside down and carve towards the stop cut that we just made. Just slice right along that stop cut. I'm using a medium detail knife for this. And yeah, it's a Helvey. Okay. Now I'm going to just flatten out this top lid a little bit here. And we'll clean up that fold. Just remove some of those fuzzies that are sitting there. Now again, when you're doing this, you have to have sharp tools. If you're getting if your wood is crumbling, for example, that's usually a sign that your tools are not sharp enough for what you're trying to do. And if you haven't learned sharpening yet, that's job number one. You have to know how to sharpen your tools. Okay, so what we did with that upper lid, we'll do the same thing with this lower lid. Again, I'm going to get an angle on there and create that lower eyelid fold. Bringing that around and then slicing right below where we put that stop cut in. And now we'll clean up this lower lid. Just take our knife and draw it across the top, sort of flattening that out some. And again, we're going to tuck that underneath the upper lid. Just like that. Got some kind of a speck here. Okay. All right, so we'll continue just to refine that lower lid. Thinning it out. Remember what we said, the lower lid is thinner than the upper lid. So, you know, in a short period of time, with this inside out eye, you can have yourself a pretty decent eyeball. Yeah. And I tell you, I think it's kind of an easy way to do it. I'm going to grab my Henry Taylor because I don't get to use it very often. It's rare that I need a gouge this big, but if I want to create a little bag underneath the eye here, and kind of bring in some wrinkles. And then, of course, draw in the eyeball. So there you go, what I would call the inside out eye. Yeah, I'm going to come along this bottom edge here and soften that. Inside out eye, Kevin Coates. Again, there'll be a link in the description below. So that'll do the examples that we have for today. 5 different types of eyeballs, and we'll come back with another video in the future showing you a variety of cartoon eyes and different techniques that you can use to make cartoon eyes. So thanks for joining us, everybody. We'll see you next time.